Why would a 62-year-old man, living peacefully on a farm, with a steady job, a loving wife, and grown children, suddenly die while bending his left arm? Just one simple motion. How could it become the line between existence and whatever lies beyond it? But more importantly, why did I, a man who thought he had life all figured out, have to die just to understand, for the very first time, what it means to live? My name is Walter Briggs. I'm a farmer in rural Wisconsin. Mornings, I feed the cows. Afternoons, I write books. Evenings, I sit on the front porch listening to the sounds of crickets. If you've ever picked up a book on cattle ranching or efficient barn design, there's a good chance you've read my words. I used to believe I was truly living, working hard, raising kids right, and minding my own business. But I was wrong. So wrong. And I didn't know how wrong until the day I died. It happened on a calm autumn morning, quiet like every other. On the wooden floor of a small-town gym, I was doing a few light stretches, trying to keep my aging muscles loose. I remember the moment vividly, my left arm bent slightly, maybe 15 degrees. A strange crawling sensation swept down my forearm, and then I was no longer there. I didn't fall. There was no crash. No one even saw me disappear. But I did. It was as if someone had switched off every physical light and flipped on something else. A different realm where old definitions of body, time, and space dissolved like morning mist. The me I had always identified with vanished like a breath in the deep woods. And yet, it was in that vanishing that I began to see myself more clearly than ever before. Do you believe that a single fleeting moment can erase every belief you've ever held about life? I do, because I lived it. And throughout this entire journey, I've carried one haunting question, a question I still hesitate to answer. If real life begins after we die, then what exactly are we doing every day we call living? But I didn't vanish completely. Not right away. Because before I left this world, I witnessed something that shattered everything I thought I knew in utter silence. And trust me, you won't want to miss what came next. People often ask me, "Don't you ever get bored living out there on a farm?" I would just smile, because I used to believe that simplicity itself was happiness. Every morning, I'd wake up before the sun crested the trees to the east, head out to check the blankets on the cows, mix feed, test the water supply, and tighten the hinges on a few sagging barn doors. By noon, I'd sit alone in the wooden kitchen, eating the cold sandwich my wife had left for me, open my notebook and write. The words flowed with the same steady rhythm as a cow's heartbeat, unhurried, unbothered, undisturbed. Ever since I was 42, I had made a habit of writing books, just to keep my mind clear amidst the endless loop of farm life. My wife used to say I lived like a wall calendar, each day the same as the one before, comforting in its routine. But I knew better. Deep inside, something in me was slowly decaying. I used to think that peace was a reward for being good. I didn't drink. I never laid a hand on my wife. I stayed out of debt. I lived within the lines. But somewhere along the way, I stopped feeling anything for myself. There were nights when I sat in the dark, staring through the kitchen window into the backyard pasture, watching the cows graze under the faint moonlight. I saw myself in them, living by the schedule, eat, work, sleep, breathe. But for what? I never told anyone about this. Not even my wife. Partly because I didn't want to become a topic of worry at the dinner table. But mostly because I didn't know what to call it. Maybe emptiness. Maybe exhaustion. Or maybe it was just the quiet truth that I had lived too long without remembering why I ever started. Looking back, the signs were obvious, even if I didn't recognize them at the time. I forgot my grandson's birthday. I skipped the early persimmon harvest, something I once looked forward to like a child waits for Christmas. I stopped listening to music. I laughed less, spoke less, and strangely enough, everyone said I seemed calmer. But they didn't know I was slowly disappearing into the shell I had built around myself, like a soul slipping from the body while no one noticed. Then one day, I came across a line in an old notebook. If you stop seeing what makes you breathe deep, stop and ask yourself, am I living or just existing? I wrote that back in 2007, on a winter night after finishing my 9th book. And now, I couldn't even remember why I wrote it. The irony stung that a man who once preached about living simply and deeply had become someone who quietly lost himself without even noticing. So I didn't go to the gym that day to get stronger. I want to see if I could still feel anything at all. I chose a simple movement, bending my arm, because it was easy, low effort, and didn't demand much. But looking back, I think what I needed in that moment wasn't muscle. It was a reason to stay. And then in just a split second, that reason disappeared. But what replaced it was a beyond belief experience that would go on to redefine everything I thought I knew about life. Are you ready? Because what comes next is the moment I died. It all started with a faint itch on my left forearm. No pain, no discomfort, just a gentle wave moving across my skin, like a breeze brushing through from the inside. I paused the motion, set the weight down, and sat on the wooden bench by the wall. My heartbeat slowed steadily at first, then slower, and slower still until I couldn't hear it anymore. It wasn't like fainting. No dizziness, no blackout, no staggering. I was still fully aware I was in that room. I could still see the dim fluorescent light reflecting off the polished floor. But at the same time, I was no longer there. It was as if another version of me had stood up and quietly stepped away from the body still sitting in that chair. I could see myself from above at an angle, as though I had become a floating camera suspended in midair. I saw Walter Briggs, slumped hands, eyes half closed, lips pressed together, oddly peaceful. I didn't panic. And the fact that I didn't panic was the first strange thing. The second was the absence of weight. I had no back, no chest, no flesh to move or ache. But my awareness, it was sharper than it had ever been. As if someone had stripped away all the noise of the world, leaving only the pure essence of being. And in that very moment, I knew I had died. I didn't ask what was happening. I didn't try to name it. I didn't resist. I simply drifted, light as a thought unspoken. I moved through a space with no boundaries, no anchor, no direction. No ceiling. No floor. No though it was. Everything vanished. And yet, everything appeared. A pure presence not shaped, not colored, but more alive than anything I had ever known. I didn't see angels flapping their wings. There were no pearly gates, no departed loved ones waiting to greet me. There was only a gentle current, like the pull of a silent tide, carrying me farther and farther from that small-town gym, a place I once thought would help me regain my health, but which turned out to be the very spot where I fully left behind the physical world. That moment didn't feel like a dream. It was more real than any dream I've ever had. Because I didn't just see it, I felt all of it. Every thought had form. Every vibration had sound. Every emotion had its distinct light. I remember each memory from my life rising like layered images, not in chronological order, but by how true they were. I saw the day I first learned to drive a tractor with my father. The day I wrote the first line in my very first book. The day I married my wife. The day I held my firstborn. The day my mother died. But these weren't just flashes. They were alive. And somehow, I didn't just watch them, I felt them with my entire being. Every sorrow, every joy, every time I unknowingly hurt someone, every hug I rushed through, all of it unfolded clearly, as if the universe was quietly flipping through the pages of my soul, letting me read it again. And the most surprising part? I didn't feel judged. No one was accusing me. No one was forgiving me either. I just saw everything as it truly was. So clearly it hurt. But it wasn't a cruel pain. It was tender, like truth brushing softly across bare skin. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I was going home. And just as I thought I was being gently wrapped in that sacred stillness, a light appeared. Not a blinding light, but a living presence. A being of love. A presence that could see through everything and still choose to draw near. I was drifting through a space with no shape. Every notion of up or down, left or right, had lost its meaning. There was no motion, yet I was moving. No sound, yet I could feel a vibration. No light, yet I could see with absolute clarity things that could never be seen with the eyes. And then it appeared. At first, it was just a point of warmth, like standing in total darkness and sensing a gentle heat from far away. Not burning, not blinding, just unmistakably real. That warmth expanded, slowly taking the shape of a sphere. It didn't spin. It didn't move. Yet every molecule within it seemed to dance. A radiant golden orb, brilliant but not blinding, soft and deep, as if all the light in existence had shed its visual quality and become pure feeling. It didn't shine in a physical sense. It radiated something else, something for which there are no words. I knew it wasn't light. It was a being. Alive. Aware. Loving. And it saw me completely. I saw it too, not with my eyes, but with something deeper. A vision that bypassed the pupils and came straight from the core of my soul. It didn't speak. Yet I understood everything it was sending me. Each wave from it struck me like a wordless whisper, warm, loving, gentle, yet not weak. It didn't ask who I was. It already knew. It didn't demand anything. It has already seen everything. And the part that brought me to tears didn't reject me. Not even when I saw the very worst of myself reflected with piercing clarity. I had always imagined judgment. I believed there would be a scale weighing my good against my failures. But there was no scale. No courtroom. Only seeing. And when you truly see, that's when you begin to understand what you still need to become. That orb never told me I was wrong. But it showed me this. Every time I turned away from myself, I was also turning away from the light within me. Every time I lived like a machine, like a soulless schedule, I wasn't doing something evil. I was simply forgetting why I ever came here as a soul in the first place. Then I saw countless threads of light extending from that golden sphere, stretching into eternity, connecting to millions of other points of light. Each one has a life. You, me, trees, animals, human beings. All of it connected by this invisible current of light. A living network, breathing in unison. And I was a part of it. Not more, not less, not more important and never meaningless. Just one among many seen, completely loved. I saw billions of universes spinning in perfect harmony, yet nothing felt rigid or mechanical. They moved like children twirling joyfully on a cosmic playground in God's backyard. Some of those universes had never existed. Others had just dissolved. But they were all breathing with the same rhythmic pulse, the pulse of love. Not romantic love, not moral or idealized love, but pure energy, the source. I don't know how long I drifted there, but it felt like I had lived lifetimes within that space. Everything was so vivid, so real, that I began to question whether my physical life with its tractors, fields, and the scent of dried grass had ever been real at all, or merely a dream I had before waking up here. Then the orb sent me something, not in words, but as a message etched directly into the marrow of my being. You don't have to be perfect. You only have to remember how to love. It was so simple that I wanted to weep, because it was something I had once known and forgotten. I asked not with my mouth, but with my entire being, when did I forget? The orb didn't answer in speech, but I saw it all. Every time I glanced past the eyes of someone I loved without truly seeing them. Every time I said, I love you, like a duty, not a devotion. Every time I moved through life unaware that I was alive. And then I understood. No one is ever cast out of the light. We only turn away from it. And the light, it always waits. It always loves even when we've forgotten how to love ourselves. I don't know how long I was there, but I knew this. Time, the thing we humans cling to as our measuring stick for everything, had no meaning in that realm. There were no clocks, no sunrises or sunsets, no calendars, no waiting, no being late, only the endless unfolding of now, an eternal present that never grew dull, never repeated. Every moment was full of awareness, as if each second was a new chapter in a book you opened and instantly understood in its entirety. In that state, I saw my entire DNA, not just as a biological structure, but as a legacy of light. I don't know how to explain it exactly, but I realized that our souls carry within them a blueprint of light, a kind of pure information imprinted directly from the source. It cannot be destroyed. It cannot be replaced. It is who we are before we ever had a name, a form, a past, or a future. It is the elemental thread of eternal life. I saw it clearly. We don't come to Earth to learn how to be perfect. We come to learn how to choose. We are given free will, not so we can always be right, but so we can be honest. No one here expects you to never make mistakes. But what you do after the mistake is where the soul is refined. I didn't see punishment, but I did see the consequence. Not in the frightening sense of karma as people often preach, but as a direct connection between every choice you've ever made and how it ripples outward through the whole. A harsh word you once spoke, I saw it traveling along threads of light, colliding, affecting, echoing back. A single hug given to someone on the verge of breaking, I saw its warmth expand, resonating gently through the network. Nothing disappears. Nothing is meaningless. I began to understand, there is no such thing as a small action. No emotion is insignificant. No moment is ever truly random. Everything we think, feel, and do is recorded not in words, but in vibration. And that orb of light held all of it. I saw millions of other souls, not in human form, but as patterns of light. Each soul had its color, its tone, its pulse. Some glowed softly like an autumn melody with no lyrics. Others surged like the ocean. Some trembled gently, like a being learning to forgive itself. No two were the same, but none were alone. We were connected like individual cells within one vast living being. And I knew not through reasoning, but through remembering that I had been here before. This place, familiar, Like a dream from childhood you can never fully retell, but always feel waiting for you to return. I had once belonged to this realm. And I would again. We all will. Because this place isn't after death. It is before beginning. And then I felt tears. Even though I had no eyes, no cheeks, I wept. Not out of regret, not out of sadness, but because it was beautiful. So beautiful it hurt. So beautiful, there was nothing left to do but cry. But all beauty must be left at least for a while. A force began pulling me away from the light. And the journey back into the body, back into the physical world, that was more painful than death itself. Because once you've known what home truly feels like, being torn from it becomes a kind of willing exile. But I wasn't allowed to stay. Something unseen drew me back. And the return, that truly was the hardest part. Because once you've tasted absolute purity, how do you live again in the noise and confusion of ordinary life? I don't know the exact moment I left the light. All I know is that, from a state of complete connection, I began to feel alone. From a place of total clarity where no questions were needed, I returned to a head heavy with doubt. From a non-physical being overflowing with unconditional love, I was forced back into this old shell of flesh, stiff, aching, and foreign, like armor I no longer wished to wear. There was no door to pass through, no direction to turn back. Just a cold, silent force pulling me out of the light and hurling me into a space that felt dark, cramped, heavy, and loud. The sensation of returning to my body wasn't like waking from a dream. It was like being sucked through a suffocatingly narrow vacuum tube, only to slam down hard onto the floor of existence in pitch black. For the first time in what felt like centuries spent in the light, I opened my eyes. But my eyes refused to see. Everything was blurred, distorted, and loud. I heard voices. Machines. People are calling my name. But sound was no longer something I understood. It was too harsh, too jarring, too physical. My heart, which had just been immersed in pure love, now pounded violently in my chest like a trapped animal. I tried to breathe, but even the air felt alien, no longer a friend. I wanted to go back to the place I had just been. But the door was closed. I wanted to fall asleep again in the arms of that living light. But all I had left was a fragmented memory of something so beautiful, it made everything else feel unreal. They told me I had been clinically dead for over 6 minutes. 6 minutes was a brutal battle for the doctors, fighting to bring me back. But for me, those 6 minutes were an eternity. I didn't just go somewhere. I truly lived in another realm, with another self, speaking another language. The language of the soul. When I truly woke up again, the clock read 8 p.m. But inside me, I was no longer the same Walter Briggs. I had lost all concept of time. I couldn't remember what day it was, or how many had passed. All I knew was that I had returned to a place whose frequency no longer matched my own. For the next 8 hours, I said nothing. I didn't smile. I didn't cry. I just looked. I stared at the hospital room, so white it made my eyes ache. I looked at my hands, their wrinkled skin and familiar calluses now feeling strangely foreign, like they belonged to someone else. I placed a palm over my chest, feeling my heart beating beneath the ribs. It was still there, but I wasn't sure if I was. When I came back, there was no music, no celestial dream, no sacred arms waiting to hold me. Only the steady beep of a heart monitor, the scribble of a nurse's pen, the crinkle of plastic, and a cold white light glaring at the ceiling. Everything was in its place except me. I was the one who no longer fit. A family came to visit. They were relieved. My wife held my hand and asked, "Are you okay?" I nodded. But deep down, all I wanted to say was, I died. And now, I have to learn how to live again, from the beginning. It took me days just to begin adjusting to this world again. The fluorescent lights felt violent. The smell of antiseptic made me nauseous. This body, the familiar vessel I'd lived in for over 60 years, now felt like a box too small for my soul. I didn't want to eat. I didn't want to speak. I didn't want to answer when someone asked, "How do you feel?" Because how could I explain that I had just come from a place where words weren't even necessary? It took me weeks to relearn how to listen. Not with ears, but with presence. To relearn how to touch another person without making them flinch from the intensity in my eyes. To relearn how to speak of what I had seen without making others think I had lost my mind. There were days I sat for hours in the backyard, watching a single bee drift from flower to flower, and felt my chest tighten not because of sadness, but because that little creature still remembered its purpose, while I was stumbling through the dark, trying to remember mine. People's voices now sounded like distorted music, like a radio station just slightly out of tune. I no longer felt interested in the news, in sports, in casual conversations. Instead, I felt a longing with no name, no shape, no place to return to. But within that longing, I began to hear a familiar whisper again. You don't have to be perfect. You only have to remember how to love. I had brought that message back with me from the realm of light, and I knew I couldn't let it fade like a dream dissolving in daylight. So I wrote. But this time, it wasn't about technique or cattle or how to design a smart barn. I wrote about the light, about death, about unconditional love, about the things no one teaches you in school, but you'll need to remember when life becomes still. And I knew my return wasn't a random accident. I began to write again, not to teach others, but to rescue myself. Each word was like a rope I tossed into the void, hoping it would catch on something real. I didn't want to forget that orb. I didn't want the light in me to dim, just because the world around me was too loud. But could I hold on to that light while living in this noisy world? Could I live as a human and still remember I was a soul? The doctors called it a post-traumatic response. My family said I just needed time to heal. But no one asked, where did you go? Because no one believed there was a place. And if I did try to share it, people would nod politely, but not because they believed. Only because they didn't want to offend. Inside me, a strange kind of loneliness began to grow. Not because I was alone, but because no one else had ever touched the place I had just come from. I watched people laugh, worry, and panic about the electric bill, dinner plans, and next week's deadlines. But I couldn't go back to being human in the old way. Because now, I didn't just know who I was. I knew what I was. And that knowing that clarity, it hurt. And then one afternoon, I was sitting in the living room. The evening sun streamed through the window, casting warm light across the family photo on the wooden shelf. My wife was outside watering the plants. The sound of water flowed steadily. The faint scent of toasted bread lingered in the air. It was an utterly ordinary moment, but in that stillness, I suddenly saw with perfect clarity. I hadn't come back to return to the old life. I had come back to become something new. Not everyone who dies gets the chance to return. And not everyone who returns understands why they were chosen. But I did. I understood that if I didn't share what I'd seen, if I didn't speak the light into this world, then continuing to live would be no different than denying the sacred gift I had been given. I was no longer the farmer who wrote technical manuals. I had become a sower of light. With every story I tell, every person I truly listen to, every time I dare to love a little more, I'm reweaving the thread that connects me to that golden orb of light. Now I no longer live out of duty. I live because something within me has been lit, and I cannot let that flame die just because the world doesn't believe in its existence. But light, no matter how beautiful, means nothing if it's not shared. And in the very moment I began to speak aloud the words that Sphere once whispered to me, my life entered an entirely new chapter. That is the final message I leave with you. Do you remember, at the very beginning, when I told you the orb of light spoke something to me, something that changed who I was so completely, I could never go back to being the same? I've carried that message with me through this entire journey. Not because I wanted to keep it secret, but because I needed you to walk far enough with me so that when you heard it, you wouldn't just hear it. You'd feel it. It wasn't spoken in words. It didn't thunder like a voice from the heavens. It didn't hum like music. It rose inside me as if I had always known it, but had simply forgotten. In that moment when the light wrapped around me like an embrace without skin, without condition, without reason, I heard it clearly. You don't need to be perfect. You only need to remember how to love. That's it. No long speech. No philosophy. Nothing lofty. But it was so exact, so piercingly true that I knew. This was the very thing I had been searching for my whole life, the thing I had tried to describe in 100 human languages but could never quite touch. We live in a world obsessed with measuring who's better, who's right, who's more successful, who's pure, who's more moral. But when I stood before that orb, which saw through every mask, every performance, every attempt to hide, I realized no one is truly perfect. And no one needs to be. Because the perfection we chase is often just fear dressed up as virtue. I had lived nearly my whole life just to be recognized. I worked hard so someone would see I was useful. I wrote books so someone might think I was wise. I raised children so someone might say I was a good father. But not once had I stopped to ask myself, do I still know how to love? To love a flower that blooms slowly. To love the rising and falling breath of my wife as she sleeps beside me. To love the soft rain at the end of a long summer. To love my awkwardness, my mistakes, my failures. And now, After returning from a place where every soul stands bare and luminous, I have just one question to leave with you. Do you still remember how to love? To truly love, without control, without conditions, without expecting the other person to respond the right way, without needing anyone to be worthy. Just to love, as light falls on the earth, making no distinction between the clean and the dirty. I'm not telling you this story so you'll believe me. Honestly, that doesn't matter. Because if you haven't died, nothing I say can fully convince you. But if you've ever sat alone in the stillness of night, quietly feeling yourself drifting away from something you couldn't name, then you've already come closer to where I once was than you might realize. This life doesn't need you to become someone else. It only asks you to return to yourself, to stop running, to stop hiding your pain, to stop pretending you're strong when you're breaking, just to be your raw, honest, tender self who still remembers how to love again. I go on living not because I chose to, but because I was chosen to speak aloud what I heard. And if today you're hearing me, maybe that same light is calling to you now softly but persistently. I had to die to learn how to live. You don't have to. Just listen before it's too late.